Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we all set those New Year's resolutions?
Yeah,
So ambitious, right?
absolutely.
Well, this time we're going to take a look at them through something completely different, an English learning podcast.
Interesting.
Right, who knew language learning could tell us so much about these cultural trends?
You're right. It's really fascinating how these simple lessons can reveal so much about our shared experiences as humans.
Exactly. In this episode, it starts with a conversation about this guy who is like dead set on changing his eating habits.
Oh, yeah.
Wants to like transform his diet, and cut out all the junk food.
Of course, the funny thing is he asks about chips right after he says that.
Right.
Like, are there any chips left?
I know. Tell me about it. But what really got me were the podcast hosts themselves, what they said.
Oh, what's that?
They were talking about how this whole New Year's resolution thing, it's such a North American thing to do.
Fully.
Like we all make these big promises to ourselves,
Yeah.
but then how many of us actually stick with them?
Yeah.
Like quitting smoking or finally going on that diet, cutting back on the drinks, hitting the gym.
It's so predictable, too, isn't it?
Isn't it?
I mean, you can almost set your watch by that initial burst of energy and then
not.
gone by February.
Seriously, think about those gym memberships.
Oh, yeah.
They go through the roof in January, and then by February.
Let's see.
I mean, really, what is it about a new year that makes us think we can just like flip a switch and become totally different people?
That's a good question. Is it like the appeal of a fresh start? Or maybe it's just because everyone else is doing it.
Maybe both, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a new year, new me kind of thing.
It's like a reset button,
Yeah.
a chance to start over.
Yeah, but like they say in the podcast,
Uh,
it's one thing to say it,
right?
sticking to it.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
That's the real challenge. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we set ourselves up for failure from the beginning,
Yeah.
because we try to change everything at
It's
once.
too much too fast.
Like going from couch potato to marathon runner in a month.
Yeah, I get it.
It's not realistic, is it?
No, it's not. Maybe that's the key,
Oh, what do you mean?
What if instead of aiming for perfection, we tried to just get a little bit better each day?
So like progress over perfection.
Exactly. And being kind to ourselves along the way.
That's a really interesting idea. I like that a lot.
Right. Instead of, I'm going to completely transform my eating habits,
Uh-huh.
it's, I'm going to be more aware of what I'm eating
Yeah.
and try to make healthier choices.
Yeah.
Subtle but important difference.
And you know what? That applies to language learning too.
How so?
Instead of trying to become fluent overnight,
Right.
celebrate the small wins,
Exactly.
like learning a new phrase or understanding a conversation.
Or even just sticking to your study plan.
Totally. It's all about enjoying the process and recognizing that each step forward,
Every single one.
no matter how small it is, it's still a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And speaking of those small steps, the English learning podcast we're talking about, it uses some pretty interesting vocabulary and phrases.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Words like junk,
Okay.
transform stuffed,
Hmm.
and even phrases like stick to it and I mean it.
Interesting.
And it's like these simple words and phrases, they actually carry a lot of cultural weight.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, I mean it.
Exactly.
Is that really a sign of commitment, or is it just the pressure to sound convincing?
Especially when we're talking about New Year's resolution.
Right.
It makes you think about how much culture is baked into language.
It really does.
And this whole idea of learning vocabulary through context.
yeah,
It just seems so much more effective than memorizing lists of words.
way more. You're not just learning the words themselves. You're
Yeah.
learning how they're used in real life.
Which is so important.
Absolutely crucial for really understanding a language.
So I'm curious about you. Have you ever made a New Year's resolution?
Oh, yeah, of course.
And if so, what were the biggest challenges you faced trying to stick with it?
Well, let me tell you.
We've all got those stories, so take a minute and think back on them.
Oh, I have plenty.
Okay, good. We'll get to those right after a quick break.
It's amazing how this English lesson just kind of naturally turns into this whole commentary on
Oh, right.
You know-
Right.
cultural norms and just the human struggle to improve ourselves.
Seriously, like, you wouldn't think an English learning podcast would give you such deep insights into human behavior, but
It's true. And what I find really interesting is this fresh start effect you were talking about earlier.
yeah,
We put so much emphasis on the new year.
right.
Like it's this time for a complete do-over.
It's like we all collectively believe that we can just erase everything on January 1st and boom, new person.
But why is that?
Yeah, that is a good question. I guess it feels like a chance to start over with a clean slate,
Maybe it's a way to cope with how complicated life can be.
Maybe.
Like a fresh start offers hope. A chance to believe that things can actually be different.
I like that.
But the problem is real change doesn't happen overnight.
And that's where those unrealistic expectations come in.
Exactly. We set these huge goals without thinking about the actual steps to get there.
Like in the podcast when the guy says he's going to cut out all junk food.
Yeah.
It sounds good at first.
Sounds very ambitious.
But let's face it, how long can anyone actually keep that up?
Not very. And that's probably why so many of us give up on our resolutions.
It's almost like we're setting ourselves up to fail.
Instead of these huge changes, what if we focused on smaller steps?
Gradual change.
Yeah. And being kind to ourselves, you know?
Now that's something I think we could all use a little more of. What if, instead of trying to be perfect, we focused on making small changes over time?
Imagine how different that would feel, instead of beating yourself up when you slip up.
Which we all do, by the way.
Of course, we're human. But imagine seeing those moments as opportunities to learn and grow.
That's a much better way to look at it.
It changes everything.
And it's not just about eating habits either.
Right. This applies to everything.
Learning a new language,
Yeah.
Adopting healthier habits, any kind of personal growth, really.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Love that. And that sometimes taking a step back can actually help us move forward in the long run.
Exactly.
So maybe instead of being so hard on ourselves for not perfectly achieving these resolutions, we should just try to embrace the whole process, ups and downs and all.
Exactly. And just like the English Learning Podcast encourages us to learn language through real-life situations, maybe we can approach self-improvement the same way.
What do you mean by that?
Well, instead of relying only on willpower.
Which, let's be real, never really works.
Not in the long run, we can create an environment that actually helps us reach our goals.
Oh, I see.
Like if you want to eat healthier, surround yourself with healthy food choices.
Makes sense. Make it easier to make the good choices.
Exactly. And just like learning a language, developing new habits takes time and practice.
Right. It's not going to happen overnight.
And there will be times when we mess up.
Oh, for sure.
But the important thing is to get back up and keep trying.
I think that's a really powerful message. It's not about being perfect.
Nope.
It's about embracing the whole messy process of growing and learning. So as we wrap up this deep dive, looking at New Year's resolutions through this English learning podcast, what really stands out to you?
You know what gets me is how much language learning and self-improvement have in common.
Oh, yeah.
Both need patience, consistency. You got to be willing to embrace the process.
And all the little hiccups along the way, right?
Exactly. And it's pretty amazing how this simple language lesson turned into this discussion about
Or culture, right?
Yeah, cultural norms, how we behave as humans, and like the psychology of setting goals.
We went from junk food
Right.
to the fresh start effect.
And why it's so hard to stick to those resolutions.
And I think we ended up with a much better, more realistic way to think about self-improvement.
Definitely. Yeah. Instead of trying to change everything at once,
Right?
we talked about making small changes over time,
Being kind to ourselves.
creating the right environment for success.
And thinking back to that vocabulary from the podcast, that phrase, it kind of takes on a whole new meaning now.
How so?
Well, maybe it's not just about saying what we're going to do, but actually showing up for ourselves,
I like that.
even when things get tough or we don't see results right away.
It's about that commitment to the process.
Exactly. And it reminds us that real change isn't about being perfect. It's about constantly learning from mistakes and celebrating every little win along the way.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on.
So as we leave you today, think about your own approach to your goals.
Whether it's those New Year's resolutions or anything else you're working towards.
What if instead of going for those huge, drastic changes,
Yeah.
you focus on those gradual improvements?
Yeah. And remember to be kind to yourself along the way.
How would that change your journey, not just in the new year, but in all aspects of your life?
That's something to think about.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.